I taught history for 33 years, and I taught the battles of Jutland, etc., and I never knew my own grandfather had participated. You know, I was furious when I traced it and looked at the dates and looked at the ship, and I said, he was at the Battle of Jutland, and I never knew. Well, 1916 to me brings back memories of my maternal grandfather. His name was John Sullivan, and when I was researching the family tree, I found that, well, I knew he'd been in the British Navy, so I looked to see John Sullivan in the British Navy, and that's great fun because those two names are so common. So on my third time, I found him. So there were two other John Sullivans in the British Navy, and my interest is the Battle of Jutland, the 31st of May 1916. So he's the third John Sullivan who was somehow involved in the Battle of Jutland. So he joined the British Navy in 1902, coming from Castletownbere. That was an obvious job for some of the men because it was a harbour where the British Navy stationed their ships. Obviously, the Kaiser was building his dreadnoughts and expanding his navy in Germany. And the New Zealand government promised an equally big battleship to the British government. And the New Zealand government paid for it. And in fact, they were still paying for it in 1947, even though it had been scrapped at that stage. They still had to pay back their loan. But anyway, the HMS New Zealand was built on the Clyde River, in the Clyde shipbuilding works. And around 1912, it went out on manoeuvres in the North Sea. And those dates from my grandfather's naval record, which I have, his handwritten one that was signed by all the captains of the ships that he had sailed on, that he was on those manoeuvres. And then when it was deemed seaworthy, etc., it took off on a courtesy visit around the world. And we also have this mysterious list of, a typed out list of cities all around the world. And on the top of it was New Zealand, in inverted commas, but we never knew what that was. So it turns out that he kept, unfortunately not a diary, but a list of every port they called into. And they eventually arrived in New Zealand, and they visited all the harbours of New Zealand. And those that they couldn't go into, they stayed outside, and people were brought out in smaller boats to visit this ship. It was like nothing they had seen before because it was so big. And I said that about half the population of New Zealand at the time went on board the ship. There was a Maori chief, I don't know whether he went on the ship or whether the captain came off the ship, but a Maori chief gave the captain a couple of gifts, and one of them was a pendant and another was a grass skirt. And he said to him, this ship is going to be in 3 naval battles, and it will come out all right. And now, one might scoff at that, but sailors are very superstitious. They did participate in 3 naval battles in World War I when it broke out. Dogger Bank, something Bight, it just escapes me at the moment, and the famous Battle of Jutland. So, as we know, the Battle of Jutland was a decider in the war, while the British technically lost it because they lost more tonnage and the Germans technically won it. The German Navy went back into the Baltic and apparently never came out again. Now, that's not to say their submarines didn't come out, but the actual Navy didn't come out. So my grandfather was demobbed in 1918 and went back down to Castletownbere. So, I mean, that's the outbreak of the Civil War. Sorry, the War of Independence, followed by the Civil War. So one can imagine that somebody who had fought for the British wasn't terribly popular. So he ended up in 1923 going by himself with his brother to America. They went in through Canada because apparently it was easier to get through Canada, and they met up with people in Canada who gave them some sort of a badge for money. I think they paid so many dollars. And then when they were going across at the Niagara Falls customs, immigration point, they were just waved through by the officials, because once they saw these badges, they knew that they had a few bob in it for them. And he was there till 1946 when he came back to Ireland. And then he lived until 1953. And I can actually remember him because he lived with my mother, his eldest daughter. Well, there's great emphasis on the Irish soldiers at Gallipoli and at the Somme. And but there's nothing about, the ones, like they talk about the green fields of France, but nobody's talking about the blue waves of the North Atlantic, that they don't seem to be getting any credit at all. I taught history for 33 years, and I taught the battles of Jutland, etc., and I never knew my own grandfather had participated. I was furious when I traced it and looked at the dates and looked at the ship, and I said, he was at the Battle of Jutland, and I never knew.